was pretty exciting, pretty emotional for me. It's been a long time coming. It was very exciting. My whole family was here. Unfortunately, only my mother's here with us today. Everybody else decided fishing on the ocean was a better thing to do at 4 in the morning. And they will be at the 11 o'clock. So today is the next few weeks. I just want to share my messages with you. I don't want to do a sermon, but it's going to be a hybrid type of sermon. I want you guys to get to know me. See, the call committee, they put a lot of time and effort and got to hear many of my stories, and so did the council. And but you, the people, have not heard many of the stories. And so for the next few Sundays, I just want to share kind of my theology and the things that influenced me in my life. And so that's an important part to see the challenges and how God maneuvered me around and how God influenced me through different people that have come in and out of my life. And so today our title is The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And so I'm going to just really share a story. And it's about 3 people, right? The good, the bad, the ugly. And these are extremes stories that came into my life, but they impacted me in significant ways, especially over the last 8 or 9 years as I processed through my call. I was called at a very young age and joined the military, and life went on and I got busy. And although God was preparing me that whole time, it wasn't until just the last 8 or 9 years that I really grabbed a hold of God's call and said, okay, I'm ready. And so these stories are going to be important for you to understand me and where I come from. But also I want to share some of the scriptures that have impacted my life. And so You'll notice if you ever email me, I always end with a special thing out of Isaiah. And I just found out yesterday that this was one of Pastor Dave Dangerfield's favorite verses as well. It's Isaiah 43, 18 and 19. And it says, "Do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing." And that's influenced my life. I had a lot of struggles as a kid, losing a father, and just a lot of issues. And to realize that the things we did is in the past, and God's doing something new. And He changed my life, and I know He's changed yours. And so that's always been a very, very important verse. And then the same thing with our reading today in Matthew 6. These readings have some significant meaning to me, and they reflect God's promise to His people through fellow followers of Christ. The Matthew reading reminds us not to worry, but to trust that God will provide our needs if we first strive towards Him, His kingdom, and towards godliness. Over the last few years, especially this last year, my family and I have had some worries and stresses discerning our call to ministry. I can't completely speak for all of them, but I know the stresses of raising a family while negotiating education and just life. And the call committee, the candidacy committee, the whole approval. And so these last few years have been very challenging, but have been just amazing. So it is times full of worries and concerns that we struggled with. And so how can we afford to do this? Where are we going to get a call? What's going to happen when student loans kick in? All these things are ideas and things that go through a family and trying to figure out what God's got. But God gives us a simple answer and a simple promise. God reminds us in verse 33 of Matthew 6, "Strive first for the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you." This promise and answer has guided me through many difficult phases and times in my life. But what's amazing is that this simple promise and answer is offered to all of you as well. It's not just the called servant But as Luther says, we're a priesthood of all believers. So all of you are in the call process. The reading out of Isaiah has been a very important verse for me throughout my Christian walk. And so what I like to do is paraphrase it. I say, don't let your past define your future, for God is doing something new in you. That's important for me. It's changed my life. I've seen it change many others. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. Is the title of my message, again, this in my story time here, is the good, the bad, the ugly. And so this might be a short sermon, but the stories are going to be impactful. And some of these are extreme, but I think each of us can feel these stories and understand that we've been in trying and difficult times as well. And so the first one, the good. The good was in 2012, I got this call from God and was excited, so I signed up to go to a Bible college in Colorado Springs called NBC, Nazarene Bible College. And I did one semester there. And I met this guy, his name was Sean, an incredible young man, Bible study. Me and him had gone, he was Air Force, I was Army, and we had gone to EOD school together, a training that we did. And so, amazing man, full of integrity. And he became a great friend right away, but through the semester, that friendship started, causing issues. And but this man was such an amazing person. His integrity was without reproach. I remember many times him telling me, I didn't even kiss my wife until the day I was married. And that's the kind of integrity that he had, and honesty and strength. But what happened is he didn't experience grace like many of us have. And so when I would get a better score on our New Testament test, he would get angry and upset. See, he was following God his entire life. And here I am, this guy that comes from the Army, and now I'm going to join and I'm going to be a pastor. And he felt I didn't deserve it. Right? And so we struggled, and our friendship got hindered. And even though this man was a righteous man, a terrific man, a great father, had 3 beautiful children, a great wife, he struggled with many of us in the class with him. Right? He's the good. But the rest of the story is that he never experienced grace. And so one day I got a better test score, and he got really upset. And so in the middle of class, we kind of had an argument. Even the professor was like, oh no, something's happening here. And so I finally got on him and I said, Sean, what are you going to do if you can't accept me, a future pastor? What are you going to do when a single mom comes into your congregation? What are you going to do when an alcoholic shows up at your office? Or a meth addict? What are you going to do? And he said, well, in front of the whole class and the professor, he says, I'm going to love them. And I said, well, that's great. Why? And he says, because that's what a pastor does. And I said, Sean, you missed it. We love because we were first loved by him. His pride got in the way. So he was a good man, a great man, but because he never experienced grace upon himself, he really struggled to give grace to others. And so, although his past was clean, this verse still fits him. Don't let your past define your future. Right? He had to find grace and see grace. And it reminds me that now that I'm in the office of pastor, I have to remember to not allow pride to get a foothold. I have to remember it's about others and serving others and not about me and how good I've become. Because we all fall short. The next one, so that's the good. The bad is a gentleman that I got to arrest in 2006. It was August 19th of 2006. I was just going on my lunch break as this Colorado State Trooper. me and my sergeant were walking into the office, and over the radio, we heard screaming over the radio of a Division of Wildlife officer who was way out in the county up on a reservoir. And he was screaming for help. And so my boss said, let the county deal with it. Let's go in the office and do some paperwork. I said, no, that guy covers me all the time. And so I jumped in my patrol car and I cruised out there, code 3, lights and sirens, as fast as I could get there. And as I pulled into this campsite area, there were 3 guys just beating on this Division of Wildlife officer. And so as I pulled up, one guy yells out, "State's here," and he takes off running into the woods. And then I run up and I tackle this guy, I get him in handcuffs, I get him back to my patrol car, lock him in there, and as I'm returning, the Division of Wildlife officer now is on the ground, and the other perpetrator has his gun and is preparing to shoot him. And so we pull him down, get into a fight, an all-out fight, and finally get him subdued and get him cuffed. And we get him in the patrol car, and we're now driving down to the county jail. And as we're driving down, this gentleman in the back of the patrol car is saying, "I know the rules, I know what's going on. If I escape, you can use deadly force." And he was begging me, "Please, trooper, just pull over and shoot me dead. Just shoot me. You can do it, you can say I escaped." And so all the way down the mountain, he's upset and he's coming off his meth high. And what I forgot to tell you is they had this big drug lab that they were cooking out in this campsite that this Division of Wildlife officer came up on. And so as he's coming off his high and we're driving the 30 minutes down to the jail, he's just throwing it all out. "I didn't want to kill that officer. It was their idea. They wanted to shoot him and throw him in the reservoir." And so he's just telling us all the stuff that's just backing up our case. And so when we get to the jail, we have to go in as the arresting officer and clear the intake cell and make sure there's nothing in there. So there's not even toilet paper. It's just a concrete bunk, a metal toilet, and we make sure there's nothing in there so that once they're put in there, if they find anything, it becomes contraband and it's a chargeable offense. But if we don't clean the cell out, then there's no way to say it wasn't in there prior. So that's something the arresting officer does. Well, they take them to intake and do fingerprints and everything. So I went in, I cleaned out the jail cell. This, of course, was a long time ago, 2006. But I remember clearly it being empty. And as we put the guy in, his name was Daniel Serpin, and as we put him in, he turned to me and said, "Trooper, you should have just shot me and killed me." And I said, it was very strange for me, but I felt God's urging. So as we were closing the door, I said, "Mr. Serpin, whether you're in prison the rest of your life or you get out tomorrow, the only thing that's going to change your life is getting right with God." And I closed the door, and that was it. And this is how God works, though. 6 years after, to the day, August 19th of 2012, I was at the Arkansas River in Canyon City, Colorado, with the church that I attended. And my son, Kanan, you guys have met him, the tall one in the Air Force, Kanan was getting baptized. And so usually this church would baptize in the river, and they would have about 30 to 40, maybe 50 people that would come and get baptized every 3 months. And it was a big event, and Kanan loved the youth group, so he was there and he was excited, and we showed up. And the pastor would call everybody who was getting baptized up to give a little testimony of what God's done in their life. And so I was there, a proud father, excited. I was asked to help baptize my son, and this was during my discernment and my call to look at, okay, am I going to go to school? Am I going to follow this call? And a few days before this incident, I remember talking with the pastor there and really struggling if I was going to sign up for Bible college or not. And I was saying, you know, I can't tell you how many times God urges me to say a prayer for somebody, and I don't. I'm too embarrassed, or I don't feel it's the right time, even though I feel that urging. And so I said, how would God use me if I don't step up to the plate when He tells me on simple things? So that was a struggle I was having that week, and we prayed a lot about it, we talked a lot about it. Well, here we are, getting baptized, and this gentleman comes up and gives his testimony. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, I know this guy. I recognize him from somewhere. And he tells a story about how he got out of prison on good behavior, but he had a life sentence, and he got out on good behavior. He talked about how many, many times he had stolen vehicles and sold drugs. He even talked about his assaults on women and on his parents and things like that. And he shared this testimony of what God did. And part of his testimony, he said, my life was a wreck until one police officer showed me compassion. And so that police officer, he said, told me to get right with God. And when I got in that jail cell, there was a Gideon New Testament and a Psalm sitting there. And I had to wait for 4 days before I went to court. So I sat in that intake jail cell and I read all of the New Testament and the Psalms. And he says he gave his life to God that day. So I hear this story, and he starts walking down to the river to get baptized, and the pastor calls him back and says, hold on, I want you people to know this gentleman. His name is Daniel Serpin. And Daniel Serpin brought 237 people here today to be baptized. Since he's been out of prison, he has started a meth addict recovery program and is praying these people up every day. And so I was excited, and so as he's walking down, I grabbed him by the hand and I said, Dan, I'm so proud of you for where your life is. And he says, and remember, I'm a state trooper, so when he said a police officer showed him compassion, I never put the two together. And he says, who are you? He says, I know you. And I didn't want to embarrass him, so I pull up and I whisper in his ear and I said, Dan, I'm Trooper Kennedy. I arrested you once. And he just instantly broke down, just hugged me, and just sobbed and said, you're the officer that showed me compassion. And so not only did I baptize my son that day, but I baptized this young man who now, that was 2012, so all these years later, he has probably led 4,000 to 6,000 people to God in his meth recovery program. An amazing, amazing young man. But he was bad. How many of us as Christians, like Sean the Good, would dismiss him or send him on his way because of his life? Not God. God says, don't let your past define your future, for I am doing something new in you. And that's what he did to Dan. My other story is the ugly. This was a story again in 2012, this whole time of discernment. And I was part of the Colorado Army National Guard, 5th Battalion, 19th Special Forces Group, and also a state trooper at the time. And I was on recruiting orders, active duty, and we had a fire in Fort Collins, Colorado, the Hyde Park fire. And so because of my trooper experience, the Adjutant General said, Sergeant Kennedy, you're running the show. And so I went up to the county there at Fort Collins. I don't know if you guys have ever been involved in a fire, but you have thousands of people involved, from aircraft to firefighters to National Guard to all kinds of SWAT units, and you have different sheriff's departments throughout the state that all come up, and they fall under command of the state of Colorado, which fell onto me and another officer, Major Fetty. And it was a pretty amazing time. But we had this whole MP battalion that was out assigned to keeping people out of the areas from looting, and then also the burning areas that are on fire. They don't want people to go in and get hurt, or risk rescuers having to go get them and them get hurt. And so we get a call. It was kind of in the evening, late in the evening, and there was this one area up on the mountain that had 37 homes, and it was kind of a big round cul-de-sac-like type of entrance. And the fire was pretty bad, and so they were pulling people out. And we got a call from a couple sheriff deputies and some of the National Guard soldiers saying, Sergeant Kennedy, there's this lady here, and she's causing a ruckus. She's been spitting on us. She's been throwing feces at us. She's really angry. She wants to get to your house. We want to arrest her. What can we do? And so we were en route reconnaissance, checking out the different areas for the next day's operations. And so I said, I'll come up there. Let's talk to her. Let's see what we do. This is a highly stressful time. We don't want to just take people to jail. And so sure enough, we got there, and this lady was off her rocker, throwing rocks, belligerent, cussing and swearing. And again, I got this urge to pray for this lady. And she was horrible, spitting, everything. And so I didn't want to do it. And I actually fought God for a few minutes, and I was like, no, we're just going to let the deputies take her to jail, get her out of the way, let the situation calm. And I kept feeling this urge to pray for the lady. And so I asked her, I finally said, before you go, I would like to pray for you and your property. Would that be okay? And then she told me where to stick my God and everything else. And this gentleman that was with her said, her name was Mary Jane. And he said, Mary Jane, then he doesn't have to pray for you. At least let him pray for your property. And so she did. She agreed. And so I started praying, and I asked her, I said, Mary Jane, could I just put my hands on your shoulder as I pray? And she was okay with that. And so I put my hand on her shoulder, and I started to pray. And she just started shaking and crying and sobbing. And she said, she looked up at me and she said, Mister, if God spares my property, I'll go to church every day of my life. And then she went and just spit a goobie right into my face and told me to tell my God where to go. And the deputies tackled her, and it became a big mess, and she went to jail. Well, 6 weeks later, the hot spots are out, and we're allowed to let people back into that community. And so I went up there ahead of time and said, I don't want my Joes, my soldiers, and the sheriff deputies to be insulted and treated with this lady, because we had flown over the day before, and we knew that 36 of the 37 homes were destroyed. And so I knew this lady was going to go off her rocker on these soldiers. And so we got there ahead of time, and sure enough, the first thing I hear is this lady's voice. I don't know if you've ever met somebody, but it's like a nails across a chalkboard. It just, Sergeant Kennedy, Sergeant Kennedy. And I just didn't want to deal with her. But she comes up, and she gets about 5 feet away, and she just starts sobbing. And she gives me a hug, and she says, my property was spared. And so she didn't even say anything else. She said, you got to send me to a church right now. And so there was a chaplain who had a church in Fort Collins. So I said, I got a chaplain right here. He will get you to the church. And I said, and if you don't like that church, they will help you find one where you're comfortable at. And so she went away, and that was my experience with her. About 30 minutes later, I hear another person calling for Sergeant Kennedy. And he's screaming, and I look, and I don't recognize the guy, but he's coming up in a wheelchair, and he's still got his hospital gown on, and this young lady is pushing him up the hill. And he says, I have a bone to pick with you. And so I said, yes, sir, I'm Sergeant Kennedy. I said, I haven't met you. I don't know what the issue is. And he said, well, I had a stroke the week before the High Park fire started. A severe stroke, and I've been in the hospital ever since until today. And he says, when I heard my property was destroyed and this horrible, ugly lady survived, I cursed God. He says, I served God my entire life, but this lady was so horrible to us neighbors. For 20 years, she would throw feces at us, she would spit at us, she would throw rocks at our cars. She was a horrible, disgusting neighbor. And he said, so I struggled with God. I served God, yet I lost everything. And the one horrible person in our life kept everything. And he struggled. And he said, so this morning, Trooper Kennedy, when I got up here, the first person I ran into was Mary Jane. And he said, I wanted to strike her. Never have I been so angry. And he said, but do you know what happened? She got up to my wheelchair and she fell to the ground and started kissing my feet and asking for forgiveness of how she treated me for the last 20 years. It's an amazing story. So his beef was he wanted to thank me because all those 20 years he felt God's urging to pray for Mary Jane, and he didn't. So these are the 3 stories that have impacted my life in this call. I got lots more stories to tell you over the years, and over the next few weeks, we're going to just learn these stories, some more stories, so you guys get to know me a little better. And then maybe in 3 or 4 weeks, we'll do normal sermons and get on with the liturgical calendar and everything. But for now, I want you guys to see where I'm coming from. They're important stories. These stories from my past have been important to me because they reflect the ideas from these little forgotten promises in the book of Isaiah. Don't let your past define your future, for God is doing something new in you. Oftentimes we think of it in a way that relates to the story of Daniel Serpent. A bad life made better. But when you read the verses again, you see no mention of God doing something better. The Israelites witnessed the parting of the Red Sea, the conquest of the Promised Land, and the Spirit of the Lord traveling with them day and night. We could go on and on about the miracles seen in the desert, but we also see God's people choosing to not follow Him or to follow idols and walking away from their God. Yet in this passage, time and time again, God returns them. They're exiled, He brings them back. He always is there to give grace and to reunite them with their Creator. And this is important because God's grace is sufficient. There's no punishment. There's no scolding. And most importantly, there's no looking back at what went wrong. God demonstrates His love through this simple promise out of Isaiah 43. Do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. I am about to do a new thing. Not make it better, but make it new. God doesn't make things better, He makes things new. So my question to you is, what is God doing new for you? Is He healing relationships? Is He guiding your path? Is He lifting you up during difficult times? Is He being your friend when you are all alone? The promise is, do not let your past define your future, for God is doing something new in each of you. Amen. Thank you. Amen.
I invite you to please stand as we confess our faith with the words of the Apostles' Creed. Please join me. I believe in God, Father Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, His only Son, our Lord. He was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit and born of the Virgin Mary. He suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day He rose again. He ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of the Father. He will come again to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Please be seated as we continue with the offering.